Ever feel like you're running on fumes? Like you're going through the motions day in, day out, but the engine inside is just empty? Harold knew that feeling. At 41, he'd been a sanitation worker for 11 years. 11 years of 3:30 a.m. alarms, hauling trash, and the gnawing sense that this wasn't the life he was meant to live. The 5 a.m. wake-up, once a symbol of his discipline, had become a heavy chain, dragging him back to a life that felt increasingly like a prison. He tried everything to break free from the rut, waking up even earlier, pounding back energy drinks that tasted like regret, listening to self-help podcasts that preached a hustle he couldn't muster. Nothing worked. The exhaustion wasn't just in his muscles, it was in his soul. It was a weariness born of broken dreams and the quiet acceptance of a life half-lived. He owed $30,000, lived in a mobile home, and his only family was his sister Sarah. One morning, the darkness felt heavier than usual. The 4 a.m. alarm blared, and as Harold stumbled to make coffee, the mug slipped from his calloused hands and shattered on the linoleum. He just stared at the mess, feeling nothing. No anger, no frustration, just a hollow emptiness. That's when it hit him. His whole life felt like that broken mug, shattered and irreparable. He called in sick, the first time in 5 years, and sat in silence as the sun crawled over the horizon. Watching the light slowly creep across the sky, something shifted within him. It wasn't the early hour that was breaking him. It was the hollowness of the asterisk Y. He was waking up for a job, not for a life. He made a promise to himself to be reliable, and that was starting to crush him. Was there still time for something different? Could he ever escape the weight of his regrets? He was sick of simply being the man who picks up other people's garbage. Harold's mobile home, nestled in the tired-looking park on the edge of town, was a testament to his quiet struggle. The interior was meticulously clean, a stark contrast to the damaged skirting outside and the sag in the porch steps. Inside, a worn recliner faced a muted television. A history book about the Roman Empire lay open on the side table, bookmarked halfway through. This was his world after 2:30 p.m. The shower, the TV, the book. The 3:30 a.m. alarm sliced through the darkness, a sound that had become synonymous with quiet desperation. Harold, 41, a sanitation worker for 11 years, swung his legs over the side of the bed. He padded into the small kitchen, the linoleum cold beneath his bare feet. The ritual was always the same. Coffee, black, strong enough to wake the dead, followed by a long, blank stare at the wall. He tried to put a picture up, some scenery, something to break the monotony, but it felt pointless. What was the point of pretty pictures when you're staring at them at 4 a.m. before heading out to another day of picking up other people's garbage? The drive to the depot was a blur of headlights and the low growl of his aging pickup truck. He thought about Sarah, his sister, and his nephew Leo. He knew Leo was getting into baseball. He should call him. The guilt, a familiar ache, settled in his chest. 2 states away felt like another world. Maybe he could swing a visit this summer if the truck held out. He owed Sarah $8,000 on a personal loan. It was a big part of his $30,000 debt. At the depot, the other sanitation workers, their faces etched with the same weariness, gathered around the coffee machine. A few nods, a grunt or two of greeting, but little conversation. Harold kept to himself, his silence a shield against the forced camaraderie. He'd seen a lot of guys come and go in 11 years. The job wore them down. That guy, Tim, was new last year. He didn't last 2 months. His route was a monotonous dance of heaving trash cans, the grinding of the truck, and the endless parade of discarded lives. Once he thought he might be able to take some pride in keeping the streets clean. Now all he felt was the weight of the cans and the slow erosion of his own dreams. He remembered playing bass guitar in his early 20s. History professor was the dream. Community college was the reality. "Harold, you all right, man?" his partner Marcus asked, his voice cutting through the fog of exhaustion. Harold just nodded, avoiding eye contact. Later that day, after his shower, the TV droned on, but Harold wasn't watching. He was staring at his calloused hands, the dirt ingrained beneath his nails. He remembered the day he got this job, fresh off the bus after his ex left him high and dry. He'd promised himself it was temporary just until he got back on his feet. 11 years, $4,330 a month, still hauling other people's garbage. Where did the time go? That night as he lay in bed, the words from his Roman history book swam in his head. Empires rose and fell, lives were lived and lost, and he was stuck here in this mobile home on the edge of town, with a mountain of debt and a past he couldn't outrun. His secret dream of buying a quiet plot of land and building a cabin felt further away than ever. But as he stared at the ceiling, something flickered. He thought about the scraps of paper in the old shoebox under his bed, filled with the poems he scribbled about the things he saw on his route. He thought about his nephew Leo, his sister Sarah. He thought about the shame of giving up on himself. The sun rose again, the alarm blared, and Harold found, so did hope, a tiny piece of it. 3:30 a.m. The digital numbers on the alarm clock glowed with a malevolent intensity. Harold, 41, groaned and slapped the snooze button, the sound echoing in the small mobile home. 9 more minutes of borrowed sleep. 9 more minutes to delay the inevitable. He knew the routine by heart. It was etched into his very bones, a daily penance for a past mistake. The move, the woman, the regret. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, the worn mattress creaking in protest. Bare feet hit the cold linoleum. 4:00 a.m. Coffee, stare at the wall. He shuffled into the tiny kitchen, the overhead light casting harsh shadows. The cheap coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the room with a bitter aroma. Harold poured himself a mug, black, no sugar. He leaned against the counter, his gaze fixed on a faded patch of wallpaper. Another day, another mountain of trash. Another step further away from that quiet plot of land. Another $4,330 earned. Another drop in the bucket of his $30,000 debt. 4:30 a.m. The drive to the depot. His old Ford pickup coughed to life, rattling down the quiet street. The mobile home park was still asleep, shrouded in pre-dawn darkness. The radio crackled with static as he tuned to the local news. Murders, fires, political squabbles. He switched it off. Silence was better. He gripped the steering wheel, his calloused hands tightening. His hands were a map of his life, each scar a reminder of a different struggle. The broken bottle, courtesy of a careless bar owner. The countless nicks from rusted metal. 5:00 a.m. The route. The weight of the bins pressed down on him, the smell of rotting food and stale beer filling his nostrils. He worked with a grim efficiency, his body moving on autopilot. Lift, dump, repeat. Each slam of the dumpster lid echoed his internal frustration. The streets were deserted save for the occasional early riser. He saw Mr. Henderson shuffling to his car. Henderson always gave him a nod, a small human connection. "Mornin', Harold," he'd say. Harold would grunt in response. The hours blurred together, the relentless physical labor numbing his mind. Sweat dripped down his face, stinging his eyes. The sun began to climb, casting long shadows. The heat of the day began to build. He thought about Leo, his nephew. He felt a pang of guilt. He hadn't seen him in almost 2 years. He thought about Sarah, his sister. He owed her $8,000. She never complained, but he knew he'd call her Sunday. 2:00 p.m., the end of the route. He felt every one of his 41 years, back aching, shoulders screaming. He drove back to the depot, the truck groaning in protest. Marcus was already there, leaning against the side of his own truck. "Rough one, huh?" he asked. Harold just nodded, avoiding eye contact. He didn't want to talk. 2:30 p.m., home, the shower. The scalding water beating down on his tired muscles. He closed his eyes, letting the heat wash over him. For a few minutes, he could almost forget. Almost. 3:00 p.m., eat, TV. Leftovers from last night, more mindless entertainment. He flipped through the channels, landing on a nature documentary. Elephants roaming across the African savanna, a life so different from his own. 6:00 p.m., history book, ancient Rome. He lost himself in the stories of emperors and gladiators, of battles and betrayals. He found a strange comfort in the distant past. 8:30 p.m., bed, staring at the ceiling. The same thoughts churning through his head. The move, the woman, the debt, the dreams, the poems. He thought about the shoebox under his bed, the scraps of paper, his secret, the tiny flicker of hope. He rolled over, exhaustion pulling him under. Another day done. Another day closer to what? He didn't know, but he hoped. He hoped he would find out. 3:30 a.m. The alarm, brash and unforgiving. Harold slapped it silent, the sound echoing in the small mobile home. He sat up, the springs of the mattress groaning beneath him. Another day. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his feet hitting the cold linoleum floor. 4:00 a.m. Coffee, black, strong, bitter. He stood at the counter, staring at the opposite wall. The cheap wood paneling faded and worn. He'd been staring at that wall for 11 years. He felt a wave of nausea, not physical, something deeper. 4:30 a.m. Drive to the depot. The pre-dawn darkness thick and heavy. The engine of his beat-up pickup coughs to life, the sound amplified in the still morning air. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Each mile felt like a mile closer to a life sentence. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. 4:00 a.m. Coffee. He poured himself a mug, the steam rising in the dim light of the kitchen. He reached for the sugar bowl, his hand clumsy and uncoordinated. The mug slipped. It crashed to the floor, shattering into 100 pieces, the dark liquid spreading across the worn linoleum. He just stood there, staring. He should clean it up, he should get another mug. He should nothing, he felt nothing, emptiness, a void. The exhaustion had finally eaten him whole. He didn't clean it up, he didn't get another mug. He walked to the phone on the wall, an old rotary phone, a relic from another era. He picked up the receiver, his hand trembling slightly. He dialed the number, each click echoing in the silent trailer. "Yeah," Marcus answered, his voice gruff with sleep. "It's Harold," he said, his voice flat. I can't come in today." Silence. "You okay, man?" Marcus asked, a hint of concern in his voice. "No," Harold said. "No, I'm not." He hung up the phone. He left the shattered mug on the floor. He walked to the living room and sat in his worn armchair. He sat there as the first rays of dawn crept through the blinds. He sat there unmoving as the world outside slowly came to life. He thought about his life, the choices he'd made, the dreams he'd abandoned, the woman, the move, the debt, the garbage. He realized the problem wasn't the 5 a.m. wake-up call. The problem wasn't the job, not really. The problem was asterisk why he was waking up. He was waking up for nothing. He was waking up to repeat the same meaningless routine, day after day, year after year. The discipline, the routine, had become a cage. A gilded cage, perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. He looked around the trailer, really looked at it. The worn furniture, the faded photos on the wall, the cheap decorations. This wasn't the life he wanted. This wasn't the life he dreamed of. This wasn't a life at all. He looked at his hands, calloused and scarred, the hands of a sanitation worker, a far cry from the hands he imagined himself having, holding a worn book, gesturing passionately in a lecture hall. 11 years. 11 years hauling garbage. 11 years since that woman left him stranded. 11 years of slowly watching his dreams fade like old photographs in the sun. He stood up, the floorboards creaking beneath his weight. He walked to the mirror in the bathroom, stared at his reflection. Pale blue eyes, bloodshot from years of early mornings. A thin white scar through his left eyebrow, a souvenir from a stray bottle. He saw not just his reflection, but the reflection of his regrets, his failures, his inertia. He saw the fear in his own eyes. "Damn it, Harold," he muttered, his voice a low growl. "Damn it all." He remembered Leo, his nephew, asking him about college during their last visit. He dodged the question, mumbled something about it not being for everyone. The guilt twisted in his gut. He wanted to be a better example, not a cautionary tale. He wanted Leo to chase his dreams, not bury them under a mountain of other people's trash. He thought about his sister, Sarah, 2 states away. She deserved a better brother. He owed her the money, yes, but he owed her more than just that. He owed her a brother who wasn't just existing but truly living. "I am done living like this," he whispered, the words barely audible, but they were there. A seed, small, fragile, but planted. He walked back to the living room, picked up the remote, and switched off the TV. Silence filled the room, a silence broken only by the distant rumble of an early morning truck. He looked at the clock. 5:17 a.m. Usually he'd be halfway through his route by now, the smell of diesel and rotting food filling his nostrils. Today he was here, staring at the walls, but something was different. Today there was a flicker of something else behind his eyes. Not hope, not yet. But maybe, just maybe, a possibility. Harold sat at his kitchen table, the pale pre-dawn light filtering through the blinds of his mobile home. 41 years old, 11 years hauling trash. The weight of it all settled on his shoulders, heavier than any dumpster he'd ever lifted. He thought about the shattered mug, the symbol of his broken routine. The routine wasn't the problem, he realized. It was what he was doing with an asterisk, that routine. He was a machine programmed to wake up, work, eat, sleep, repeat. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The 5 a.m. alarm hadn't stopped working, He'd stopped being present, stopped caring, stopped dreaming. The early mornings, once a badge of honor, had become a self-imposed prison sentence. He remembered his college dreams, the history books gathering dust on his shelf. He was meant for more than this. Harold thought back to his early 20s, playing bass guitar in that garage band. The joy, the freedom. That felt like a lifetime ago, another Harold entirely. Before the move, before the heartbreak, before the weight of responsibility crushed the spark. Maybe that spark wasn't dead, just buried. He pulled out his phone, a cheap, cracked model, and Googled free online history courses. He scrolled through the results, a flicker of excitement igniting in his chest. A course on ancient Rome. He remembered spending hours in the library as a kid, devouring books about emperors and gladiators. A smile touched his lips, the first genuine smile he'd felt in months. "What the hell?" he muttered to himself. "It's free." He clicked the link and started the enrollment process. The simple act felt like breaking free from a chain. It wouldn't solve all his problems. It wouldn't erase his debt or bring back lost time. But it was a start, a small crack in the wall of his self-made prison. The old shoebox full of poems. It was stashed at the back of his closet. He opened it, the smell of old paper and forgotten dreams filling his nostrils. He hadn't looked at them in years. Fragments of thoughts, observations, small moments of beauty he'd found amidst the ugliness of his route. He read one aloud, his voice rough and hesitant. "Sunrise on Elm Street, garbage bins like silent sentinels. Even here the light finds a way." He paused, a tear welling up in his eye. It wasn't great poetry, but it was his asterisk. It was a piece of his soul, captured on paper. He closed the box, a sense of quiet resolve settling within him. The 5 a.m. alarm still loomed, but now it represented something different. Not just work, but the chance to learn, to create, to be something more than just the man who picked up other people's garbage. He knew he still had $30,000 of debt hanging over him, that he needed to be there every day at the sanitation department. He knew that he has to keep paying the $8,000 loan off to his sister Sarah. But the sun rose higher, casting warm golden light into his mobile home. Harold stood up, a new sense of purpose in his eyes. He would still wake up at 5 a.m., but now he would wake up asterisk for asterisk something. The trash still needed hauling, yes. But Harold also needed saving. The commitment was a quiet one. No grand pronouncements, no dramatic gestures. Just Harold, 41 years old, sanitation worker for 11 years, standing in his mobile home as the sun painted the walls gold. He looked at the worn linoleum floor, at the chipped coffee table, at the photo of his sister Sarah and his nephew Leo on the fridge. The weight of $30,000 in debt pressed down on him, a constant reminder of past mistakes and present limitations. He knew he needed to tackle that debt, but he did not know how. He picked up the phone, his calloused fingers fumbling slightly. He dialed Sarah's number. "Hey," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Just checking in. How's Leo?" he listened as Sarah's voice filled the small room, talking about Leo's baseball practice and his struggles with math. The guilt gnawed at him. He should be there, helping out, being a better uncle. He should be a better brother, too. "Listen, Sarah," he said, interrupting her gently. "I'm gonna start sending you an extra $50 a month towards the loan." It wasn't much, a drop in the bucket compared to the $8,000 he still owed, but it was a start, a tangible commitment. He could already see her smile across the line, hear the relief. He wanted to make it up to her. He wanted to show her he was trying to change and be a better brother. Later that evening, after his shower, as he looked over his routine for tomorrow, Harold found a free online history course offered by a local community college. Ancient Rome, his favorite. It started next week. He hesitated, then clicked enroll. Fear and hope warred within him. Could he really juggle work, debt, and school? He will have to wake up earlier to do that. Was it just another pipe dream, setting himself up for disappointment? But the image of that sunrise on Elm Street flashed in his mind, the words he had written years ago echoing in his ears. He needed to carve out something for himself, something beyond the bins and the black bags. He needed to honor the promise he made to himself to be reliable, to be more than just asterisk this. With the first lecture coming in less than a week, Harold was determined to succeed, not just for himself, but for the man he wanted to be. Harold set his alarm for 3:00 a.m., an hour earlier than usual. He laid in bed, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional car passing outside. Sleep wouldn't come. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to relax. Images flashed through his mind. Sarah's smiling face, Leo catching a baseball, the shattered mug on the floor. He tossed and turned, the weight of his debts and regrets pressing down on him. This was it. He had to push, had to prove that he could learn something new. The new routine will be the thing. The alarm blared to life. Harold swung his legs over the side of the bed, the familiar ache in his lower back already present. He shuffled to the kitchen, the linoleum cold beneath his bare feet. The coffee maker sputtered and hissed, filling the small mobile home with its bitter aroma. He poured himself a cup, the dark liquid scalding his throat. Then, with his cup, he went to the small, worn desk tucked in the corner of his living room, the cheap particle board stained with coffee rings from years past. The online course material was dense, full of unfamiliar terms and complex theories. Harold squinted at the screen, his eyes burning with fatigue. He read a paragraph, then another, struggling to focus. His mind wandered to the overflowing bins on Elm Street, the screech of the truck's brakes, the endless monotony of his route. Each time he came back, he'd read the text again and again. Outside, the sky began to lighten, the first hints of dawn painting the horizon. The birds started to chirp, their melodies a stark contrast to the silence inside the mobile home. Harold rubbed his eyes, fighting the urge to give up. He thought of his dad, factory worker, never gave up on anything. That was what he respected. Hours later, as he hoisted a heavy trash can into the back of the truck, the weight of it felt different. It still strained his muscles, still ground his joints, but there was a new lightness to the burden. He wasn't just hauling garbage, he was hauling himself towards something better. The lectures he read before work, the early mornings now had a purpose beyond survival. "Mornin', Harold," a woman called out from her porch, a small wave accompanying her greeting. Harold returned the wave, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It was Mrs. Peterson, who always put out cookies for the sanitation crew during the holidays. He'd never really seen her before, not properly. He usually was too busy or too tired. Now he saw the wrinkles around her eyes, the kindness in her smile. As the days bled into one another, Harold settled into his new rhythm. 3 a.m. wake up, history lessons, sanitation route, Sarah and Leo on Sundays. The exhaustion remained, but it was different now. It wasn't a soul-crushing weariness, but the kind of fatigue that comes from hard work and purpose. He still felt the sting of regret, the ache of lost dreams, but a flicker of hope was growing in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to rewrite his story. One evening, as he sat at his desk, rereading a chapter on the Roman Republic, he picked up a pen and a scrap of paper. He started to write, Not about trash or trucks, but about emperors and senators, about the rise and fall of empires, about the enduring power of history. The words flowed, awkward and clumsy at first, but gaining momentum with each line. It wasn't poetry, not really, but it was something. Something that was his. He thought of waking up early, not to continue with the job, but to carve out time to think about what he wanted to do, to feel in control, and it made all the difference. He had the time to learn something new and be something new. Later, as he walked into work, Harold noticed the sun rise. It was a simple thing, but as the bright sky illuminated the world, Harold knew it was a new day for him too. He felt tired still, but happy and hopeful. The next morning, Harold woke before the alarm, 2:57 a.m. He didn't fight it. He slipped on his jeans and a worn flannel shirt, the same clothes he always wore, but they felt different now. He brewed a pot of coffee, the cheap stuff, but the smell was richer somehow. He sat at his small kitchen table, not staring blankly at the wall, but with an open history book in front of him. He read about Julius Caesar, a man who rose from nothing to conquer an empire, a man who, like Harold, probably knew a thing or two about hard work. Day 12 on the new routine. The route was the same, the bins were just as heavy, but Harold saw things differently. The sun seemed brighter, the air cleaner, even the smell of garbage was less offensive. He even caught himself whistling a tuneless melody as he heaved an overflowing dumpster into the truck. A woman watering her flowers gave him a smile. He gave her one back, a real one. Sarah called on Sunday. Harold almost didn't answer, dreading the usual guilt trip about not visiting more often. "Hey, Harold," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Leo got a good grade on his history test. He said you told him some stories about the Romans." Harold felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling he hadn't felt in years. "Yeah, well, he's a smart kid," Harold mumbled, trying to hide the pride in his voice. "He said he wants to visit you this summer," Sarah continued. Harold paused. He hadn't planned for that. He didn't even know if he could afford to host them, but he found himself saying, "Sure, that'd be great." Day 16. During his lunch break, Harold usually sat alone in his truck, wolfing down a sandwich and scrolling through his phone. Today, he drove to the local library. He walked past the rows of books, feeling a strange sense of reverence. He browsed the history section and pulled a few titles off the shelf. The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, A Brief History of the Peloponnesian War. He checked them out, feeling a thrill he hadn't experienced since he was a kid. As he left, the librarian, the woman he saw the other day, smiled at him. "Enjoy your reading," she said. Harold tipped his head in acknowledgement and walked toward his truck. He noticed she was reading a book about the Civil War on her break. The debt still loomed, $30,000 a dark cloud over his head. The $4,330 a month felt like a cruel joke when he looked at his finances, but something was shifting. He started brown bagging lunches, saving $5 a day. He canceled his cable subscription, another $80 saved each month. Small things, but they added up. He also thought about asking for overtime. It would be a grind, but the debt was the first thing he was going to fix. The first win. Day 21. Harold stopped at the gas station after his shift. As he filled up the tank, he noticed a flyer on the bulletin board, "Free history course at community center." His heart skipped a beat. He ripped off the flyer and stuffed it in his pocket. He wasn't sure if he would sign up, but the possibility was enough. That night as he wrote, the words came easier. He wasn't writing about emperors and senators anymore. He was writing about the sunrise, about the woman with the flowers, about his sister's phone call. He was writing about Harold, the sanitation worker, the almost history professor, the man who was finally starting to wake up. Day 30, 1 month in. The pre-dawn gloom still clung to Harold as he sat with his coffee, but something was different. The hollowness, the feeling of being a ghost in his own life, was fading. He wasn't just going through the motions anymore. He was waking up asterisk for asterisk something. His sister Sarah noticed. "You sound lighter," she said during their weekly call, "like you're not carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." Harold just grunted, not wanting to admit he'd been drowning. He didn't want to jinx it. Leo got an A on his history test, she continued, her voice filled with pride. Guess someone's stories about ancient Rome paid off. Harold smiled, a genuine smile that reached his pale blue eyes. Maybe he was making a difference, even from 1,200 miles away. Even at work, things shifted. He started making eye contact, offering a nod to the people he saw on his route. One woman, the one with the petunias, gave him a wave. "Mornin', Harold," she chirped. "Those flowers are beautiful," he replied. It wasn't much, but it was a connection. It was something. He asked for overtime at work for every weekend. The boss nodded and added his name to the list. His boss, Frank, a man of few words and even fewer smiles, stopped him one afternoon. "Heard you called in sick a few weeks back, first time in 5 years." Harold braced himself for a lecture, but Frank just shrugged. "Just don't make a habit of it. We need you out here, Harold. Reliable guy." Harold nodded, surprised by the almost compliment. He was reliable, it was true. Maybe it was time to be reliable for himself too. The extra money from overtime was slowly piling up in a separate account. He was determined to pay off his credit card debt fast. That night, Harold sat at his small table, the history book stacked beside him. He opened his notebook and began to write. Not about emperors or battles, but about Frank's rare smile, about Sarah's pride, about the petunias. He was writing about life, about finding beauty in the mundane, about finding himself in the garbage. The words flowed, and for the first time in a long time, Harold felt like he was finally, truly awake. He was alive. He was 41 years old, and he was just getting started. Harold's 5 a.m. alarm still felt brutal, but now there was a purpose. He'd stumble out of bed, the same weary bones protesting the cold, but instead of just staring at the wall, he'd brew his coffee and open his history book. He'd read for an hour, losing himself in the rise and fall of empires, the lives of forgotten men. It was an escape, yes, but it was also a reminder that even the smallest life could leave a mark. He even began carrying a small notebook in his pocket, jotting down interesting facts or quotes he wanted to remember. He had a near photographic memory for historical dates, but writing them down in a tiny notebook felt like a commitment. The overtime shifts were relentless, but Harold found a rhythm. Hauling extra bins built his stamina, the kind of physical exhaustion that led to deep, dreamless sleep. He pictured the credit card debt shrinking, those thousands of dollars slowly melting away like snow in the spring sun. He'd write down the exact amount of money that goes to the bank every week and write "paid" in big letters across the record when it's complete. He remembered telling his sister, Sarah, about his debt years ago, the shame stinging his throat. He was determined to fix this, to make her proud. One Saturday, while sorting through a particularly messy dumpster, Harold found a discarded bass guitar. It was beat up, missing a string, covered in grime. He remembered the garage band in his early 20s, the raw energy, the camaraderie. He hefted the instrument, surprised by the weight. He took it home, cleaned it up, ordered a new set of strings online. It took a few days for him to install them and tune the bass. When the guitar arrived, his fingers, calloused from years of gripping trash cans, fumbled with the tuning pegs. But slowly, painstakingly, he got it in tune. That evening after his shift, after his history reading, Harold sat on the edge of his bed, the bass guitar resting in his lap. He hadn't played in almost 20 years. He tentatively plucked a string. It sounded tinny, out of tune. He adjusted the tuning peg and plucked it again. Better. He started with a simple blues riff, the same one he used to play with his old band. His fingers felt clumsy at first, the muscle memory rusty, but slowly the notes began to flow. He played for an hour, lost in the music. The small trailer seemed to vibrate with the sound. He thought about Leo, his nephew. He hadn't seen him in over a year. He imagined teaching Leo how to play, the two of them jamming in his tiny mobile home. He put the bass away, a smile playing on his lips. He looked at the shoebox in his closet. He reached for it and took the short poems about the things he saw on his route, which he kept in an old shoebox. He thumbed through the scraps of paper, rereading the words he had scribbled down in the dark hours before dawn. One scrap of paper had scribbled sunflowers across the front. The next morning, Harold saw the woman with the petunias on his route. He waved. "Morning," he said. "I saw you found a bass guitar at the dump. I saw you bring it home," she said. "Yeah, I did," Harold said sheepishly. "I used to play. A long time ago, though," he added. The woman smiled. "My grandson plays. Maybe you could give him some lessons," she asked. Harold was surprised. "I don't know," he said. "I'm not really a teacher." "He's a good kid," the woman said. "He could use a good influence." "He looks up to you." Harold paused. He looked at the woman, at the petunias, at the rising sun. "Okay," he said. "Tell him to come by sometime." For a moment, he was no longer just a sanitation worker. He was Harold, the bass player. He was Harold, the mentor. He was Harold, alive again. The days bled together, but now they had a different hue. Harold still woke at 3:30 a.m., the alarm still jarring, but the dread had lessened. He wasn't just getting up to haul garbage. He was getting up to live, to play, to teach. He found himself humming old bass lines as he drove his route, the city lights blurring into a symphony of possibility. He even started making eye contact with the people he saw, offering a nod, a small wave. Some looked surprised, others just nodded back, but each interaction felt like a tiny victory. One afternoon, a few weeks later, his supervisor, a burly man named Frank, called him into the office. Frank wasn't one for small talk. He usually just barked orders and grumbled about budget cuts. "Harold," he said, his voice gruff, "got a new route for you. Lighter residential, less heavy lifting." Harold frowned. "Why me?" Frank shrugged. "Heard you been doing good work. No complaints. Plus, that Mrs. Henderson on Elm Street won't stop talking about how you helped her with her groceries." Harold felt a flicker of pride. "Just doing my job," he mumbled. "Yeah, well, keep doing it. This route comes with a small bump in pay." Harold's ears perked up. A bump in pay meant getting that much closer to being free. The new route was a breath of fresh air. Quiet streets lined with trees, small gardens bursting with color. It was still hard work, but it didn't feel like the same soul-crushing grind. The people were friendlier, too. More waves, more smiles. One day, a woman stopped him. "You're Harold, right? The one who plays bass?" He nodded, a little embarrassed. "My son, Billy, he's been wanting to meet you. He's been practicing every day since he heard you were giving lessons." Harold smiled. He hadn't thought of himself as an inspiration, but maybe he was. "Tell him to come by this weekend," he said. "I'll show him a thing or two." That weekend, Leo called. "Hey, Uncle Harold," Leo said, his voice cracking a little. "Mom told me you're playing bass again. That's awesome." Harold felt a lump in his throat. "Yeah, well, trying to get back into it," he said. "You still playing?" "A little," Leo said. "School keeps me busy, but I miss it." Harold paused. "Maybe I could send you some lessons," he offered. "Online, if you're interested." There was a long silence. "Really?" Leo asked. "That would be amazing." Harold smiled. He wasn't just teaching some kid down the street. He was reconnecting with his family. He was being an uncle. He was making a difference. He started researching online history courses, surprised at how many were free or low cost. He found one focused on the Roman Republic, a period he'd always been fascinated by. The lectures were dry, but the material was captivating. He started waking up even earlier, not out of obligation, but out of genuine curiosity. He spent an hour before his route, lost in the world of senators and legions. The weight of his daily life momentarily lifted. He also began taking his notebook with him, jotting down observations and fleeting thoughts. The poems were still rough, fragmented, but they were becoming something more, something honest. One evening, Sarah called. "Harold, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice serious. Harold's heart sank. Something was wrong. "What is it?" he asked, bracing himself. "Leo told me you offered to give him bass lessons," she said. "He's been so excited. He hasn't been this engaged in anything in months." Harold let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "Yeah, well, I figured I could help him out," he said. "He looks up to you, Harold," Sarah continued. "He sees you as someone who made something of himself." Harold was stunned. He never thought of himself as a role model. He was just Harold, the sanitation worker who messed up his life. I don't know what to say," he stammered. "Just be there for him, Harold," Sarah said. "He needs you." Frank called him back into his office a few weeks later. "Harold, sit down," he said. "We've been watching you, your performance, your attitude. It's all improved. We're offering you a promotion, foreman position, more responsibility, more pay." Harold was speechless. Foreman, he had never even considered the possibility. I don't know," he said. "I'm not sure I'm qualified." Frank chuckled. "Don't sell yourself short, Harold. You've earned it. Think about it. Let me know tomorrow." Harold walked out of the office in a daze. Foreman. He was no longer just the guy who picked up the trash. He was someone they saw potential in, someone they trusted. He went home, showered, and sat down at his small table. He looked around his mobile home at the faded wallpaper, the worn furniture. It wasn't much, but it was his. He thought about Leo, about the lessons, about the history courses. He thought about the small plot of land he dreamed of buying, the tiny cabin where he could just read and be left alone. He picked up his guitar and started to play. The notes flowed easier now, the music filled with a newfound confidence. He thought about the shoebox of poems, the words waiting to be shared. He closed his eyes.